There was a brand that for decades was synonymous with American speed. Not Ford, not Chevrolet, not Dodge, but Pontiac. A name that appeared in movies, on television shows, and in the dreams of an entire generation that grew up believing that driving with excitement didn't require being a millionaire. And one day, that name disappeared. Not because its cars were bad, not because nobody wanted them. It disappeared because the company that had created it spent 20 years slowly stripping away everything that made it different. When the 2008 financial crisis hit and it became necessary to choose which brands would survive, Pontiac couldn't defend itself because General Motors had dismantled its arguments one by one over 20 years. Today, you're going to discover how one of the most iconic brands in American automotive history was eliminated without anyone coming to its defense. You'll understand why the reason everyone knows isn't the real reason. And you'll see that the decisions that killed Pontiac were made long before anyone was talking about crises, bankruptcies, or government bailouts. As is almost always the case in the automotive industry, the official explanation and the real explanation are not the same thing.
Welcome to AutoLedger.
Pontiac was born in 1926 as a companion brand to Oakland, a division of General Motors with a simple idea to offer a six-cylinder car at the price of a four-cylinder. It worked so well that in 1933 General Motors eliminated Oakland and Pontiac took its place as its own division. For decades, it was the midpoint between Chevrolet and Oldsmobile in the company's lineup. Affordable yet with character, popular yet with something extra. Everything changed in the 1960s when an executive named John Z. DeLorean decided that Pontiac wasn't going to be just another General Motors car. It was going to be the fastest. In 1964, DeLorean put a 6.4-liter engine in the Pontiac Tempest Le Mans and called it the GTO. The engineer said it was crazy, the executive said nobody would buy it, and the customer said something else entirely. The GTO became America's first modern muscle car. The car that proved you could have a huge engine in a mid-size car at a price ordinary people could afford. Ford responded with the Mustang, Dodge with the Charger, Chrysler with the Barracuda, but it was Pontiac's GTO that lit the fuse. By the late 60s, Pontiac was General Motors' most exciting brand, the one young people bought, the one that graced the covers of automotive magazines, the one engineers at other brands regarded with respect and a touch of envy. It wasn't just a car, it was an attitude. The summer of 1977 was the best time in Pontiac's history. Smokey and the Bandit hit theaters in May, with Burt Reynolds behind the wheel of a black and gold Trans Am, chased across half the state of Georgia, driving as if the laws of physics were optional. The film grossed $126 million on a budget of $4 million, becoming the second highest grossing film of the year, second only to Star Wars, and the phones at Pontiac dealerships rang off the hook. Trans Am sales skyrocketed. Before the film, they were already solid, but afterward, they became the best figures an American sports car had seen in years. Because every time the movie opened in a new theater, people would head straight to the nearest dealership. 5 years later, in 1982, a black Trans Am returned to the screen, this time on television, as KITT, the AI-powered car from the Knight Rider series. And an entire generation of children grew up wanting a Pontiac that could talk, drive itself, and chase down the bad guys. Pontiac wasn't just a car brand, it was part of American popular culture, and it seemed impossible that something like that could ever disappear. But within General Motors, something had changed. Starting in the 1970s, the company began making decisions that prioritized cost savings over brand identity, sharing platforms, engines, and bodies across divisions, and differentiating cars only by the logo and a few trim details. What had once been a brand with its own distinct character began selling rebadged versions of Chevrolets. The same car, different logo, lower price, and therein lay the problem. Pontiac was selling Chevrolet cars at prices lower than Chevrolet itself, losing money on every sale, and simultaneously stealing customers from its sister brand. It was the worst possible scenario, a brand that wasn't making money for itself and was hurting the others, and the fans noticed because the cars no longer had the same personality. They no longer conveyed the same feeling. This is where it all began. During the 1980s and 90s, Pontiac tried to maintain some of its sporty image with models like the Firebird and the Grand Prix, but the trend was clear. Each new model shared more with Chevrolet and less with Pontiac, and the market noticed because sales steadily declined throughout the 1990s. Without a model capable of replicating the cultural impact of the 1970s Trans Am. And then came the Aztek. In 2001, Pontiac launched an SUV with such a polarizing design that it became synonymous with design failure. Automotive magazines included it on their lists of the worst cars ever made. Even employees privately admitted it was a disaster. And although years later it would gain a certain ironic notoriety as Walter White's car in Breaking Bad, at the time of its launch it was a clear sign that Pontiac had lost its way. But here's something that almost no one mentions. While Pontiac was sinking, General Motors had a decision to make, and it could have invested in restoring the brand's identity by developing genuinely Pontiac cars with their own distinct character. In fact, in its final years, the brand launched the G8, a performance sedan developed with Holden in Australia that received excellent reviews, and the Solstice, a lightweight roadster that generated real excitement among car enthusiasts. But it was too late. In 2008, the global financial crisis hit, car sales plummeted worldwide, and General Motors, which had been the world's largest automaker for decades, lost that title to Toyota that same year. Losses mounted at a rate that made what came next inevitable, and on June 1, 2009, the company filed for bankruptcy, the fourth largest in U.S. history. To receive a bailout from the U.S. government, General Motors had to demonstrate its ability to restructure, and that meant eliminating brands. On April 27, 2009, CEO Fritz Henderson announced the end of Pontiac, describing it as an extremely personal decision, and no one came out to publicly defend it. There's one detail that perfectly encapsulates the extent to which Pontiac had ceased to be Pontiac long before General Motors officially announced it. The last Pontiac ever made was a white G6, a four-door sedan with nothing to distinguish it from any other car on the market, and the workers at the Orion Township plant signed the body before it rolled off the line. A small farewell ritual for a car that was anything but special, made by a brand that had invented the American muscle car. That white G6 now resides in the Pontiac Transportation Museum in Pontiac, Michigan, and the brand that was born to be the fastest in the General Motors family ended up in a museum with a white four-door sedan. That, more than any sales figures, explains what had happened in the previous 20 years. The official version of why Pontiac disappeared is this. The 2008 financial crisis forced General Motors to declare bankruptcy, and as a condition for receiving a government bailout, it had to eliminate brands, and Pontiac was one of those chosen. That's true, but it's the consequence, not the cause. The cause began in the 1980s, when General Motors turned Pontiac into a rebadged factory Chevrolet cars with the Pontiac logo, sold at lower prices than the Chevrolets themselves, a strategy that destroyed the brand's identity with each model and lost money on every sale. And while Pontiac sank, Buick prospered, generating annual profits that Pontiac couldn't even imagine, and also being a brand with a huge presence in China, one of the most important markets in the world for General Motors. Eliminating Buick was never an option. It had to be Pontiac. The 2008 crisis was the official reason for the closure, and the decisions of the previous 2 decades were the real cause. An excellent G8 and an exciting Solstice came too late to save a brand whose raison d'etre General Motors had stripped away, model by model, for 20 years. And when the crisis hit and choices had to be made, Pontiac had no arguments to defend itself because the company had taken them all away. The clues had been there since the 90s, nobody wanted to see them. On October 31, 2010, the last Pontiac dealerships closed their doors, leaving General Motors with 4 brands in North America: Chevrolet, Buick, Cadillac, and GMC. The withdrawal was quiet. The last remaining models were sold off at small discounts, like any model at the end of its production run, without a global farewell edition or official ceremony. The company retained the rights to the Pontiac name and all its trademarks, so technically Pontiac is still owned by General Motors today, even though there isn't a car bearing the name. Over time, some models from the final years found posthumous recognition. The G8 was praised as one of the best sports sedans the brand had produced in decades. The Solstice became a cult classic, and the Aztec, the car that symbolized the decline, gained worldwide fame thanks to Breaking Bad. Today, classic Pontiacs are collector's items with ever-increasing values, and a well-preserved Trans Am from the Smoky and the Bandit era can fetch six-figure sums at auction. The Trans Am that Burt Reynolds personally drove sold for nearly $500,000 in 2022, and the first-generation GTOs, designed by DeLorean in 1964, are among the most sought-after muscle cars on the American market. The irony is complete. The cars that General Motors failed to champion when they were still in production are worth more today than they ever were new, and the company, which decided that Pontiac wasn't worth investment, still owns a name that enthusiasts haven't forgotten. Every few years, rumors of a revival surface, and each time they're allowed to die quietly. Burt Reynolds died in 2018, the black and gold Trans Am from Smoky, and the Bandit remains one of the most recognizable cars in American film history. And Pontiac, the brand that manufactured it, has been gone for over 15 years. General Motors didn't kill Pontiac in 2009. In 2009, they simply stopped keeping it alive because the real decision had been made long before, when someone in Detroit decided that a brand with soul could become a brand without it and still sell just as well. It couldn't. Sometimes corporations learn that lesson too late, and sometimes they simply don't learn it at all. If you found this interesting, I've included another video on screen that I'm sure you'll enjoy.